You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we've got some major news handed down by the Supreme Court late last night against Donald Trump. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, Brian, this is not hyperbole. On the Richter scale of 1 to 10 on legal, procedural, and constitutional developments, this is like a 17. This is enormous because the Supreme Court basically just said, we're not even going to wait for what the lower courts, including the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, says about this. We are telling the Trump administration to stop right now. Stop the unconstitutional deportations of Venezuelan migrants. So let's back up and talk about how we just got this stunning and I think potentially unprecedented ruling from the Supreme Court. So late last night, the courts got wind that it looks like the Trump administration is basically just going to completely disregard everything that's been coming out of the courts, including the Supreme Court, and just unconstitutionally start deporting Venezuelan immigrants again to El Salvador. So a couple of things happened in rapid succession. One, some of the plaintiffs ran back to the federal court in D.C., Judge Boasberg, and they tried to put a stop to what looked like some more imminent unconstitutional deportations. Judge Boasberg, not surprisingly, said, listen, I am sympathetic to your cause, but given what the Supreme Court said, it doesn't look like I have jurisdiction to put a stop to this. So what happened? So the ACLU, representing a group, a class of these Venezuelan immigrants, filed something with the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Now, that's the federal appeals court that covers Texas, among other states where these immigrants are being held. And the Supreme Court, in really a mind-blowing development, in the middle of the night or in the early morning hours, issued a ruling, a one-paragraph ruling. First of all, let me read just a portion of it for our viewers. The government, meaning the Trump administration, is directed not to remove any member of the putative class of detainees from the United States until further order of this court. Now, the one-paragraph Supreme Court ruling also notes, look, we know you filed something with the Fifth Circuit. We're not even going to wait for anything further before we put this temporary stop to what, by all accounts, are unconstitutional deportations. And they said, look, the United States Solicitor General can file something with us as soon as possible, but we're putting a stop to it right the F now. My characterization, they didn't say the F. But this is such an earth-shattering development because it looks like somebody has finally prodded the Supreme Court into wakefulness to give a damn about the constitutional protections that we all enjoy, including the Venezuelan immigrants, and they're done playing these stupid reindeer games with the Trump administration. And it looks like now this is going to set up a battle royale that will potentially, send us off the cliff of a constitutional crisis. But the good news is we're not there yet.
So, Glenn, the Supreme Court put a stop to these deportations. Is it similar to like a temporary restraining order where they say, okay, until we really dig into the merits of this case? Or did they rule on the merits of this case and basically say you can no longer deport these people to Venezuela?
Yeah, that's a great question and a little bit of a curiosity. Now, the Supreme Court said that they are temporarily putting a stop to it, a stay to it, but they almost sort of forewent all of the procedural and legal niceties of waiting for the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal to rule, waiting to see what the Solicitor General, what the DOJ, what the Trump administration said about all of this, what its position was. This was almost a sort of reflexive, knee-jerk move by the Supreme Court that apparently at least 7 of the 9 justices believed was necessary to protect the integrity of the Constitution and the rights provided therein, specifically due process rights. So they kind of decided to abandon all procedural niceties and just issue this in the middle of the night, telling the Trump administration, stop it right the F now. So it's hard to say, well, technically, is this a TRO? Is it a preliminary injunction? It's an edict of the Supreme Court. That is the word that, remember, a few days ago, Justice Sotomayor used. threatening, we will hand down an edict, and if you all don't obey with it, there's going to be hell to pay.
Glenn, what do you make of the fact that, I'm going to ask two questions here. What do you make of the fact that it was a 7-2 ruling, meaning Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Amy Coney Barrett agreed with the liberal bloc of the court, agreed and created this pro-democracy, pro-constitution faction of the court? And what do you make of the fact that even still, even in a ruling where Barrett, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch agreed with the liberal members of the court, that Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito still opted to dissent?
Yeah, Brian, to answer part one of your question, Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, Amy Coney Barrett, and let's not forget Chief Justice John Roberts crossed over, joined what we traditionally call the liberal bloc of the court. What that tells me, Brian, is that this is a constitutional bridge too far, even for those 4 justices who often are willing to side with Donald Trump in ways that run contrary to both the language and the spirit of the Constitution. It looks like those 4 justices said, you know what, there are some unconstitutional acts by the Trump administration that even we cannot endure or endorse. That is a good thing, particularly because of the dramatic nature of the way they reached this decision at light speed without even waiting for the parties to fully brief it up. So I think that bodes well moving forward. Then part 2 of your question, what does it say that Alito and Thomas said, oh, come on, Constitution, schmonstitution, we dissent, and Justice Alito will be issuing opinion in the near future? It tells me that those 2 justices don't give a rat's ass about the Constitution, the expressed guarantees of the Constitution, or what the Trump administration chooses to do to immigrants. They can mistreat them, violate their rights, kidnap them and send them to foreign prisons. And it looks like neither Alito nor Thomas care one whit about their rights or their constitutional protections.
Glenn, this is a Supreme Court that feels almost obsessed with process. I mean, oftentimes, by the time it actually gets to the Supreme Court and they actually deign to weigh in, it might just be some procedural matter, and they don't even weigh in on the merits because they're just so focused on these process elements. And so, what does it say that not only did they rule here on the actual issue at hand, but they jumped over the Fifth Circuit and didn't even wait for that process to play itself out?
It says they're trying to save our democracy and sort of salvage some shred of respectability for their own position, for the legitimacy of the Supreme Court, and for our constitutional guarantees. Brian, think about it. It was just a few days ago that in the Abrego Garcia case, what was the Supreme Court saying? Well, listen, we understand that the judge ordered the Trump administration to facilitate Abrego Garcia's release from that El Salvadoran prison and his return. But, we don't know that the judge should also have ordered the administration to effectuate the return, right? Because, that has a slightly different meaning. And if you order the government to effectuate his return, you might be trampling on the administration's prerogatives to conduct foreign affairs. And now the Supreme Court has said, you know what? Strict dictionary definition of words be damned. Yeah. We're not going to let Donald Trump bring an end to our constitutional construct of government or governance, which is represented by what Trump is trying to do.
And that's the part I want to dig into. How much of an impact do you think Trump's open defiance of the Supreme Court is having now? Because I understand that all of these cases have to be taken unto themselves, that you can't necessarily discriminate against a certain plaintiff or defendant because of their actions or how they comported themselves in a different case. But we also live in reality, and the Supreme Court can see what Trump just did with the Abrego Garcia case, where he basically mocked the Supreme Court with the El Salvadoran dictator in the Oval Office by saying, "Oh, I can't do it. There's nothing I could do about this. How about you?" And then Bukele's like, "Well, I couldn't possibly release him into our country. Like, I guess our hands are just tied here," with this like wink and a nod the whole time. And so, how much of an impact do you think that whole circus has had on the Supreme Court moving forward in terms of how they deal with the Trump administration?
I think it potentially has three impacts. One, it alienates the Supreme Court justices. And guess what? I will be fine if, moving forward, every Supreme Court edict that's handed down against the Trump administration is a 7-2 vote.
Right.
Let Thomas and Alito get in their expensive motorhomes and private jets that are provided at Republican billionaire donors' expense and go fishing for the rest of this Supreme Court term. I'm fine with that. Two, I think by openly defying Supreme Court rulings, orders, and edicts, Trump will continue to alienate enormous swaths of the American people, never mind countries around the world, and that can potentially hasten the political demise of Donald Trump. And then three, and perhaps most importantly, I feel like maybe the Republicans in Congress will need to go into a time machine, a Wayback Machine, and go to August of 1974. Why do I say that? Because in August of 1974, when the Watergate tapes were revealed and showed indisputably that Richard Nixon was involved in what, by today's standards, looks like a quaint little,
Right.
criminal scheme, a lovely little scandal, the Watergate scandal. But that was enough to prompt the Republicans, particularly in the Senate, to march on the Oval Office and say, you, even though you are a Republican president, the leader of our party and the leader of the country, you're done. You will be impeached and removed. The reason I reference that is because at some point, what Donald Trump is doing to try to grab all the dictatorial power he can, including ignoring Supreme Court precedent, that runs the risk of completely destroying any authority, any power, any reelection prospects that the Senate Republicans, indeed all congressional Republicans, might have. And if there's one thing I can tell you, it is that defying Supreme Court orders, rulings, and edicts so requires the impeachment and removal of a president of the United States that we have to stop giving the congressional Republicans a pass because we have, concluded they have no spines and will never sprout even a vertebra or two. I think the pressure will begin to mount on congressional Republicans to deal with what, by all accounts, is a president determined to destroy our constitutional nature of government. And that, inures to everybody's detriment, including the Senate Republicans.
Well, we will, of course, stay on top of this as Trump has set up kind of yet another constitutional crisis here. He already defied the Supreme Court once with this Abrego Garcia case. Now we have a broader ruling as it relates to the deportation of all of these Venezuelan migrants. So we will obviously keep an eye on this. Again, a major move for the Supreme Court to weigh in even before the Fifth Circuit had the opportunity to do so. So with that said, for everybody who is watching right now, if you want to follow along as this rapidly unfolds, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.